Ryan, I can actually say to you, welcome back to the Business Karaoke podcast because we're lucky enough actually to have you back for the second time. How have you been since we last spoke?
Good, thank you, Brittany. I appreciate it. I think it's been trying times. I can't lie, but I've used that as an opportunity to actually focus on my own kind of mental and physical
Hmm.
fitness. So I've been getting in
Ah,
shape and also helping managing the time well, so that
hmm.
you seem like you have a lot more time when you're not going back and forth to the office. So you can manage your time a little bit around that and get more done actually. So I think I'm getting quite used to it. What about yourself?
Thank you for asking. Yeah, actually, very similar. For me, I noticed that I took kind of the quarantine like very seriously, and I didn't leave the house at all. And then I kind of recognized, hang on a second, my body feels terrible. So then about I think 6 months ago, I actually drifted back to my childhood hobby of rollerblading. So like you,
Yeah.
yeah, I decided, yeah, let's find some time in the day and get a little healthier. Yeah. Ryan, we actually get a kind of a special opportunity with you that we don't really have with a lot of other people, is that maybe we get to kind of like dig a little bit deeper. So today we're actually going to go into not only the idea of customer experience and also research, but we wanted to also dive into design as well. But before we kind of do that, um, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you first
Hmm.
began, or where your interest was first sparked with research and design. Because for me it seems like a career path that's not necessarily new, but it's not necessarily something that people have always done. And people haven't always said, I'm going to grow up and be a customer experience expert or
Hmm.
something like that. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how that journey was for you.
Well, thank you. If you look back basically through my history and through my experience, I've had uh, quite a diverse path to get where I am. And I think that actually what I find out is that a lot of people that are in customer experience have very similar backgrounds in the sense that
Hmm.
they've maybe worked for different companies in different industries. Maybe they've actually had the opportunity, like myself, to work in different markets around the world. And so I think that allows you to keep growing and keep learning and keep picking up new skills. And I think
Hmm.
compared to someone maybe who's been in a company, the same company for maybe 10, 15 years, you're all of a sudden you're exposed to this different way of thinking and this new inputs and
Hmm.
these new approaches to problem solving. So what I realized is that people, really good people that I know that are in customer experience or customer experience professionals, we say, are people that have had very similar diverse backgrounds of experience and you know broad exposure to a lot of concepts and a lot of things. And if you look at the thread throughout my career, it's always been around the customer. It's been about customer
Right.
acquisition. It's really about how can we improve our experience for our customers to pull them away from a competitor in the market. And
Hmm.
so it's always it's been the backbone of my career has always been around the customer, but it's really in the last, I guess, maybe 7 or 8 years that has been formalized around we actually need to be more proactive in what we need to do to
Right.
align with customers' expectations is we need to start proactively designing our experiences, not just saying, well, this is what we have, this is our process, you just need to deal with it. It's like, okay, well, if the person isn't happy with our, let's say, bank opening process for our bank account, then obviously they'll go to somewhere else. And we've
Yeah.
seen that now. Customers obviously have very low tolerance for bad experience, especially online. So once they have those, they'll easily go to a competitor. So now companies need to proactively design that. And then to your point, I mean, research and design are inherently linked.
Mm.
If it's very difficult for a company to, for example, improve the bank account opening process if they don't actually understand what customers really want and where their troubles lie. And so that's I think hopefully it's a really nice lead into our
Yeah.
discussion about research.
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. And even why, maybe why they're even opening their bank account as well, which is then something also very
Yeah,
interesting.
exactly.
Before and also once as we kind of like enter that one thing that I feel always so lucky to have you on the show is that not only do we have a really global best practice professional, but we also have someone that's very in tune, or that has had a lot of experience in Japan. One thing we didn't get to do on the last episode is we didn't really kind of get to hear a little bit of your Japan story, but you're back in Japan after a little while. But maybe you can share a little bit about why, of all the places in the world that you could choose, that you're in Japan right now.
Sure. I think, like many people, once you leave Japan, so you're in Japan for a while, and then you're maybe here for 5 years, and then things get hard, and you feel like maybe you're missing out on other elements of life. Maybe it's not as gritty as some other markets around the world, and so you leave and you cut it in the U.S., or you go back to Europe, or I was in Singapore and things like that. So once you come back, you kind of start, once you're away, you start feeling like you start to miss Japan, and you start to
Yeah.
feel like, I miss the life in Japan. I mean, I'm very transparent about the fact that Japan is an incredible place to live. It's
Hmm.
sometimes a really hard place to work, unfortunately. I
Absolutely.
mean, sometimes the working culture is quite different. And so the reason I'm back here this time is I feel like, because I speak Japanese, because I know the market here, maybe in a better place than some other people to actually
Mhm.
help, you know, Japan
Yes.
accelerate their transformation projects. And I
Yes.
feel like that for me is a big driver.
Yes. And I
Um,
love that.
and even if I have one or two companies, yeah, even if I help just one or two companies, I feel like I'm doing something to really improve on and Japan's standing in the world, or at least making them more internationally competitive with other global best practices.
Yeah. So if everyone listening, we're in good hands. We're in good hands with Ryan.
Hmm.
Ryan, let's begin a
Sure.
little bit with that kind of like context in mind. Is Japan is kind of synonymous with high quality product, incredibly polite customer service, but that isn't necessarily what research is, and that's not necessarily what human-centered research is in particularly. So maybe let's kind of begin by setting the scene that a high quality product doesn't necessarily, or isn't necessarily, derived from human-centered research. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at let's say very simply the Walkman, right? So the Walkman, they started to they designed the Walkman, and then over time the engineers got really smart, and they said, okay, let's add this additional functionality, and let's make it really complicated, and then and so over time they created this product that actually became super, from an engineering perspective,
Mm,
super technical and had a lot of functionality, but it departed from what customers were actually thinking that they needed, which was more simplicity in their lives. And so
mm,
something as simple as the iPod, it was the original iPod by Apple, for example, played music, and it had one button on it. And it was, everything could be controlled with really one button, or several. It's very easy UX navigation movements. So I think what's happened is, a lot of times products in Japan, again, and this goes back to what we were talking about on our first podcast, was that with this engineering mindset, they pack a lot of functionality and engineering um, uh, expertise and
mm.
of functionality and value. They think from an engineering perspective, that's what the customer wants. They pack it in there, and then really the customers have to learn how to use it, and how to learn how it's going to add value to their lives. Whereas I think that a Western perspective is really, we start with understanding what are the unmet needs, or the latent
Mhm.
needs and desires of our clients, of our customers. And then we work backwards, we draw the line backwards to our technology capabilities and our engineering prowess, and say, okay, these, given that these are our skill sets, let's create something that unlocks value that customers didn't even know that existed. And let's
Yeah.
create something in between there, as opposed to starting over here and then working backwards to the customer and trying to market something to them.
Right. And that sounds like business sense, doesn't it? It sounds like if we reverse engineer the success or the business success of a product, that would essentially make more sense. But what we've seen, not only or across the world, I think there are some parts of the world that are doing it better than others. But our focus a little bit today is on the Japanese market. And I'd love to, as we go kind of deeper into the questions about research and design, one thing that I kind of wanted to begin with was certainly the business case of why in that you believe that design needs to have a seat at the table. And both you having not only a
Mhm.
research background, a design background, but you're also leading one of the largest consultancies as well in Japan. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit also about someone who's not necessarily has a lot of design or research experience. How do we kind of think about design having a seat at the table?
Sure. Uh, I think, as you know, in Japan, unfortunately, designers are highly commoditized. And so
Right.
I think the attitude, I think it's the level of sophistication or maturity really around where companies see the value that designers can provide them. And so they think that, designers can help our product look beautiful, and they can help create this beautiful custom commercial that we can put on television and sell more products. And so I think really it's about beautifying the project or the
Mm-hmm.
product or the service. Whereas in actuality, more mature markets or more sophisticated companies will see that actually it's not about just the end product and then just tweaking it and making it look beautiful. It's actually much higher upstream in the product development stage, where we're
Mm-hmm.
saying, okay, is this a project that customers will even use? What are the key functionality or the key elements of this product or service that customers actually prioritize that will give them the most positive impact? So I mean, if you think about, for example, if they say, okay, we're gonna launch this product to the market, and we think that this
Mm-hmm.
is what customers want, then basically you begin using the design process to certainly start testing that hypothesis. And so I think design, by its methodology, design is everything starts with, okay, how are the people going to use it? How's it people going to interact with this designed product? And so using those inputs help you create an iterative development process or a design thinking process that starts with the latent needs or unexpressed desires of customers. Then you work and then you start iterating it to create something that aligns really nicely with what they need and what they want. And then all of a sudden, you don't have to teach them or force them or market them a product or a service. You just say, here's the product that you basically told us you needed, and
Mm-hmm.
that we've heard you, and now we've actually developed and we put it out on the market for you to buy. And so um, I think that it's all about creating a lovable. So we say, a lot of people say MVP, which is minimal viable product. It's actually, I'm trying to push the terminology, not MVP, but MLP, which is most lovable product, because actually
Yes.
viable means functionality is just, it works. But
Mm-hmm.
actually lovable means that people will buy it, people will talk about it, people will use it, right? And so lovable to me is taking that viable product concept one step further and saying, okay, this is something that people will love. It really adds value to their life, and they'll talk about it, buy it, and it'll market itself. You don't need to pay Dentsu or some advertising agent all this money to create a
Yeah.
commercial with some famous Japanese TV stars on it to sell it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's. I once heard the analogy that it's kind of the difference between an architect and a realtor, right? So a realtor, you have to go around and show each person the house, and you have to really go for like a hard sell. Whereas an architect, all they have to do is just send the bill, right? That's it. We
Mm-hmm.
build exactly what you wanted. And so when we kind of
Yeah.
introduce this model, because the Japanese are also very much looking towards the outcome, how to say it or sell it and what sales, etc. But if we think about that, actually this process and what you're saying, if I can rephrase, is that maybe even by implementing this, by using research and then designing something that a customer loves, that actually the sales you might even be able to redirect some resources from sales, because you don't need it anymore because the customers are actually actively looking for it.
Yes. So if you think, that's a good example, because it's the model's basically flipped upside down. So it's like, okay, spend minimal amounts on research, and then create this product through your smart engineers, that ultimately to sell it, you need to spend a lot of money on marketing and commercials and to get it out there and create a market, and create a
Mm-hmm.
demand. Or spend a lot of money in the beginning where you're actually designing you're doing the research, you're listening to customers, you're finding out the needs, and then all of a sudden it becomes cheaper because you all of a sudden you created a product that they need and want, and then you have to spend less marketing dollars on that because all of a sudden you created something that is just so closely aligned with what they've been desiring. And so a really good example of that is Slack. So for example, Slack started out initially, they became, I think it was a $1.5 billion valuated company, and they didn't have a single salesperson.
Interesting.
They didn't have a single salesperson when they first started. And the idea was not to create, to invest all this money and to go sell something that people didn't need, but it's actually to create something that people needed. So they started by first word of mouth, and then actually expanded between businesses and teams, and all of a sudden it grew on its own organically, and they didn't actually have a single salesperson pushed out in the market pushing it.
That's so interesting. In your role, you spend a lot of time speaking to CXO level leaders of different organizations. Can you talk to us a little bit about what are the talking points that they're having? So for example, when you're sitting down and you're introducing, for example, the idea of beginning with user research, because we know, and this is not necessarily a Japanese unique thing, but when we, in design thinking, we believe in first understanding the problem and then solving for it. So making sure that we're addressing the right it, or designing the right it before designing it right? That kind of idea. What are the kinds of conversations that you're noticing? What are some of the issues that are kind of at the table, and what do you find yourself repeating, constantly?
Well, I think it's pretty common. I mean, right now globally, and I think to some sophisticated CX professionals in Japan as well, is they find themselves doing the wrong thing. So if you think about what the CX professionals care about here, they care about measuring experiences. They care about justifying their existence. They care about, just checking the box just to say like, okay, we're trying to improve customer experiences here. But actually what they're not doing is they're not connecting that to growth and revenue, and what's the benefit of measuring all of these experiences if actually, and ultimately they don't actually drive revenue, new customers, or growth for the company. And so I think the struggle that a lot of companies face, not only in Japan but around the world, is that you have customer experience professionals that are not speaking the same language as what the CEO wants or the CFO wants, because okay, we're investing in all this customer experience. We see our NPS scores going up, or we see our other metrics are going up, but what is that actually doing for us? Because they're not clearly connecting that to outcomes. And so you have more sophisticated customers, like CMOs, for example, that have a remit to basically improve the experience for their existing customers, but also improve the prospect experience to help conversion by actually improving also what the experience that customers have before they even actually buy a product. And so connecting that customer experience story to revenue and actual outcomes is really a struggle for, I think, most people these days.
Yeah. And is there a way that you help them map that or bridge that gap?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, you traditionally, you don't necessarily look at, okay, just how many happy customers we have. We say, okay, what are some things that actually, think about what is it that the CEO wants or needs, or what is he talking to the market about? Maybe he's saying, we're going to grow our customer base by 50% by next calendar year. So if you're talking about acquisition, if he's talking about acquisition, then you need to actually make sure that your customer experience program is aligned with the corporate goals of the company, and not saying, okay, well, we're going to measure how many people are, we're going to measure, let's say, something different from that, because then obviously then you have a disconnect, because if you're measuring how many customers are happy, or will recommend a friend to buy the product, that's different than actually acquiring that might not be the exact thing that the CEO and the market is expecting of the company. So I think it's not as, unfortunately, it's not as simple as just saying, just have an NPS score and we connect everything to NPS. And then obviously that's going to be that's going to show it for being successful or not. It's
Mhm.
actually connecting your story around a growth story that the CEO and then the company is talking about.
I love that because it takes the guesswork, and it takes the guesswork out of, gaining allies within the organization, really, which is the same thing of why we do
Mhm.
user research as well, is that we don't just design a project or product and like cross our fingers and hopefully kind of it lands. We go to the field, we do the research, and that's kind of where we build. You brought up a point for me as we were preparing for the episode that I found incredibly interesting that I hadn't thought of before, which is that Japan has, as we kind of touched on, Japan has kind of this reputation for having incredibly high quality product, yet. And so in terms of functionality, but isn't necessarily mature when it comes to designing for emotion. And you mentioned you when you were explaining it to me, you used an example of remitting money. So if you can talk a little bit about that, because that was for me such an impactful moment of really moving from functionality to emotion, and that actually really resulting in tangible business outcome.
Yeah, if you think about when you remit money, and I often use this example just because it's very simple for a lot of people to understand, is so banks will say, okay, hey, now you can remit money on our online, right? So you don't have to come in the branch. So I mean, that was given that that's a lot of markets are way beyond that. I mean, Japan is still sometimes, as you know, it's sometimes they'll have very clunky digital experiences, even for our banks here in Japan. But
Yeah.
let's say, something as simple as I want to remit, funds to my landlord, for example. I need to pay my rent at the end of the month. So I think functionally they say, okay, well, we have a button here. You just move money from your account and this and that. And I guess functionally it works, but it doesn't really address any of the complex emotions that people have when they're doing that. Because oftentimes people say, okay, I feel I have some anxiety, for example, that my money's going to be there on time because
Yeah.
I have to make payment by like the 25th.
Yeah.
And so some people might say, well, I'm worried because I'm not getting paid at this time of the month. So do I have
Mm-hmm.
enough money in my account
Mm-hmm.
when I make payment? And then after you send the money, then maybe say people are nervous. That says, well, did it really go through? Do I need to check
Mm-hmm.
that? And I think that even anecdotally from my own experiences here, sometimes I even see that the confirmation is very unclear. If money's been sent, sometimes I see that I feel like my screen is frozen because of whatever reason, and I have to refresh it. And it's like, did the money really get sent or what?
Do I
I
have to
mean,
do it
those
again?
are
Yeah.
very simple things, but yeah. And I won't say the bank. I won't say what bank this is, but they have a big red notice on the top of the next screen that says your money has been successfully transmitted.
And
And I
it's
was like,
red.
well, that's great, but then why is it red? Yeah. All of a sudden I'm thinking red. Oh, it's like a warning
Error.
sign. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
a hazard sign, right? And so I'm thinking you have to look at that very carefully. Otherwise you're saying, oh, wait, did I do something wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, very simply, they're not thinking about the complex emotions that people have while they're going through a very simple process like that. And so, in order for Japan to continue to evolve along that scale, it's doing more research to understand what are people feeling. Okay, people feel anxiety. People feel like they don't have self-efficacy and the ability to do that on their own. So we need to provide more support.
Mm-hmm.
We need confirmation and a simple verification. I mean, those type of things could be easily solved by doing the proper research that actually will inform, the most best human-centric design outcomes.
Yeah, and this is maybe an opportunity for us to dig a little bit deeper into also the research part, which is also for there's as many design research methods almost as people on the planet. Like there's really a
Mm-hmm.
whole lot of different ways that we can gather information. Some of which are not necessarily design professionally based. That you have to be design professional in order to do them. Things like observation. Humans have been doing this for thousands of years or hundreds of thousands of years since the beginning of time. So can you talk to us a little bit
Mm-hmm.
about the kinds of research maybe that not only that exists, but the kinds of research that maybe we can think about implementing in Japan, because as we mentioned, the maturity of user research in Japan is quite limited, that sometimes it seems to be, let's just put a few people in a room and, get a thumbs up or a thumbs down, that there's really quite a little bit more to research than that. Can you share a little bit more on that?
Right. And I think what you're referring to are the focus groups, right? So
Right,
I
the
think
focus
focus
groups.
groups are traditionally in Japan, and the focus groups are really the most cost efficient and most kind of expedited way to get done and check that box and say, okay, we
Hmm.
did research, right?
Right.
Problem with that in Asia, and I think personally what I've seen in Japan is that oftentimes you get 5 people in a room and you start talking about a product or a service, and then two of the people in the room will be more vocal than the other people, and then so you have maybe you have 3 people that probably wanted to have a differing opinion, but they don't say anything because they feel like they're a little bit, they're wanting to maintain that hua,
Hmm.
the Japanese hua or peacefulness in the room, and so no one's really confrontational, no one wants to really disagree with each other, and so ultimately then people just coalesce around it, some type of consensus that says yes, okay, we think that product is good or bad. And especially I've seen this with companies that I think are very sensitive type products. Like, I mean, we're talking about skincare ointments or maybe medicines or things. People are just embarrassed or a little bit
Yeah.
ashamed to talk about those things, but they're still doing focus groups. So I'm I'm not I'm totally transparency. I'm not a fan of focus groups at all. And so I think if what but there's a lot of agencies, research agencies in Japan that provide those services, and I think it's relatively cheap and easy to do. And so they say, okay, let's just do the research, and then so we go contract one of those research companies and we get that done. I
Mhm.
think that the real value comes actually when you go and you interview customers one-on-one. And then using ethnographic research, for example, is you go and you observe them in situ,
Mhm.
actually working and going in their office and watching them go through to transfer the money or to
Right.
actually apply. You know, let, let's watch them actually use their mobile phone to try to do the sale transaction in a in an environment that they're comfortable with or where they normally would do that. And then all of a sudden, these these we like these research nuggets will come out, and then you'll say, "Wow, I never even knew that. I never even
Mm.
thought about that before." Because these are things, these insights you will never actually see if you're just doing surveys or focus groups. It's actually, you have to go spend the time doing contextual interviews or ethnographic research with actual customers to
Mhm.
get those.
Absolutely. And I'd love to hear a little bit more of your thoughts on using ethnographic research in maybe surprising ways, or maybe like a surprising business case. So, for example, one thing that comes to mind for me is that we were working with a Japanese, or working with a very traditional Japanese company, but their accounting department, because apparently, everyone was late and everyone was kind of blaming accounting. And then we asked accounting, okay, tell us your process. And of course, the process was perfect. Well, we do this, and then we do this, and then we do that. Okay, stamp, looks good. Why is everyone complaining then? Right? Why is there a problem if if everyone's saying that they're doing what they're supposed to do? And then what we ended up doing was, instead of simply just asking, is that we drew a journey map and said, tell us, we through the day, could tell us when this comes in, what do you do? And they started stepping out, well, we do this, and this. And then we started recognizing that there were some heat points on the journey map, in the sense that, hang on, this piece of paper is
Mhm.
touched by 17 different people. Why does this has to go out to so many different departments? Doesn't make any sense. And so this was not necessarily
Right.
a product, but it certainly was a service. And we recognize that using ethnographic research can even be useful in an accounting department. Do you have any stories that kind of stood out for you as interesting?
Oh yeah. That's really good. That's a really good example, Brittany. I thought that's a good one. Yeah, I have countless ones. I mean, one that comes to mind is we were working with, or I was working with a skincare company, and that
Hmm.
they were trying to provide uh, skincare products to men, right? And
Hmm.
so what they found is this target segment they felt was not buying their product. And what they said was, well, why are these people not buying their product? And so what they did is they actually went to some of these factories, and they actually and some of these people, working men, and they found out, and so they went to offices and they went to factories and to interview these working men. And what they found was, they talked to them and they said, oh, I don't use any beauty products. I don't need it. I'm a man. I don't do anything for my skin. They kind of had that really masculine
Hmm.
um, mindset, I guess. And so what they found was, then they noticed in the office that some of these men had little baths underneath their desk, and
Hmm.
it's like it was just a little foot bath. And so what they found was, they said, well, what is that? And they said, oh, well, sometimes after a long, hard day in the factory or something like that, I take off my shoes and I soak my feet in that bath. And I said, well, that's interesting then. So you do care about your feet, you do care about your health and skin like that. And they found that actually they use, this very, almost like a calculated in the store type of like
Hmm.
solution in the bath with their feet. And so something as simple as that is like, they would never have found that because people
No.
wouldn't probably have ever did that on a survey or in a focus group, because they wouldn't have thought, wow, you know what? Actually, I do care about my feet,
Mm.
my feet, because I'm on them all day and I'm working, and do something as simple as that. So they found that was a really good avenue into finding new ways to engage these type of customers that felt like they weren't using skincare products.
Right. And you wouldn't put that on a survey. Do you soak your feet after
No,
work? Like that's not,
yeah, right, exactly.
not something that kind of like comes to mind. It's so interesting. Of course, there's some companies that have user research maybe included into their design process. What would you say to a company that maybe is still very new to the idea of user research? How would you encourage a company to start implementing user research in their design process,
Mhm.
and what would be the benefits for them?
Well, I think it's fair to say that it's okay to start small, because
Right.
basically what a lot of companies get confused is they say, oh, well, we've got 1,000 customers, or we've got 100,000 customers. There's no way we can go actually and interview all of our customers to
Hmm.
understand what their needs are. And it's remarkable in the sense, and my rule of thumb is always, if you interview basically 3 to 6 customers per
Mm.
persona, let's say you have, let's say, and just for people, just to remind them, so you have a persona, which is basically it is a fictitious person that actually represents a segment that you're developing or designing a product or a service for. So if, for example, we are saying we want to design a new um, toothpaste for working mothers that don't have a lot of time but like really sweet things, then you would say, okay, well, let's look at our demographic who we're targeting, and let's say, Brittany. Let's create a persona named Brittany, and she's a working mother that actually uses toothpaste, and she fits this demographic and everything. So you're designing all the products and
Hmm.
service for this fictitious person named Brittany. So given that you would say typically for a project, let's say you might have 5 personas. So if you have 5 personas, you only need to interview, let's see, 3 to 6 people
Mm.
per persona. So let's say working mothers, let's school kids, let's say fathers, like depending on that, let's say you interview 3 to 6, or total, that would be like 15,
Mm.
15 or between 15 and maybe 30 people that you're interviewing. And that actually gets you probably 85 or 90% of the way there, because the
Yeah.
more people that you interview, the level of insights actually becomes insignificant. So it's actually, there is a level of diminishing returns. So if I interviewed 50 people, or if I interviewed 100 people, or if I interviewed 1,000 people, it's going to cost me a lot just to get 1,000 people, and I'm not going to actually learn that much more. And that was a study done by Stanford, actually, Stanford Design School, that I referenced, that 85% of the way there. So I mean, start small. I mean, even, and just do guerrilla research. I mean, just get
Hmm.
like a couple people from the customer experience group or the digital group to go out and start interviewing customers or friends or people that to start. And
Hmm.
then you building out your technique, and you start building out methodology from there. And that's really where you start.
Hmm. I think that's almost encouraging in a way that you don't have to go and begin with like 100,000 person survey and everything like that. Just beginning, with 3 to 6 people
Hmm.
and knowing that that's actually a statistically relevant data. I think that's actually really quite exciting.
Yeah.
Where do you think, and this is purely observation and just personal experience, because there's not really any big huge studies done, but what for
Hmm.
you do you think has kind of been the maybe the hurdles or maybe the pullback in terms of investing or moving towards research when the Japanese are kind of in many ways known for efficiency, in many ways not, but for Japanese companies that haven't embraced user research, and if we think about
Hmm.
Japan, especially being a business culture of low risk, there's nothing more low risk than doing your research before launching a product.
Right.
So what do you think
Yes.
maybe was that? Where do you think that a gap exists, or why do you think it exists?
Right.
Just personal experience.
Well, if you think about it, so the reason that does exist, and I think it's we talk now about this we say the age of the customer, and
Mm,
that was coined by Forrester Research. They talk about now we're in the age of the customer, because it used to be that obviously companies had all of the touch about, or like they had the ability to dictate prices, dictate products, dictate how those were going to be distributed. So the companies had all of the really the power. And so
mm-hmm,
now power has swung now to actually customers, because customers
mm,
have the power to compare products on their mobile phones, and they can actually talk to their friends and get recommendations easily, and they can actually tweet about something and say how bad it was. And so all of a sudden the power shifted now to the customer. And so basically, unfortunately, companies now haven't been they haven't evolved quick enough to actually, you know, to keep up with these empowered customers. And so basically
mm,
what's the problem is that companies now, they can't actually just, so what they used in the past, they didn't have to do the research. They just basically said, well, here's our product, and so customers really didn't have a choice to use it. But now customers have all these choices. And so companies have no choice now but actually to accelerate their ability to align with the expectations and needs of customers. And the only way they're going to truly understand the expectation needs of customers is by going out and talking to them and seeing how they use their products, and really understanding, like we just talked about it, where those nuggets are of those research nuggets.
Can you talk to us maybe some and maybe a memorable experience with a client? Maybe it was a client that perhaps was not interested in user research, and maybe then they went through this transformational experience, but or maybe it was just one of the worst or one of the worst customer experiences you've ever had in your life. But maybe you want to share with us a memorable story that for you kind of had a few learnings or a few takeaways.
I can talk in general, yeah. So we
Yeah, of
were working,
course.
for example, with a financial services company, and they basically said, "Oh, we have all the research. We don't need any do any extra additional research, right?" And so, in their mind, they have all this data on customers, and really what that was is marketing data. And so it's data
Mm,
about like what companies want to buy and stuff like that. But marketing data is very different than actual customer experience data. Customer
interesting.
experience data is all about what customers really want and need, and what are their, we say, customer experience drivers, or their experience drivers. Marketing data is what people will click through, and what people will purchase, and what people, it's really about conversion. So we talk to this company, they say, oh, we have a lot of data, and what we see is that customers they won't actually download an app, and they won't actually use an app to do these simple processes that we've got a well-established telephone call center that helps handle this. And what we did is we said, okay, well, we'll challenge that data, that idea that you have. And so we actually went out and we talked to probably 50 or 60 of their customers, and we
Hmm.
found overwhelmingly that the customer data totally disagreed with what the senior leadership thought. I mean, they said, yes, we will download an app. We would actually go through and use technology. This would actually improve our lives tremendously if we did this. And then so we created something, an iterative, POC, or product proof of concept, that actually aligned with those customers' needs and expectations, and it was very successful. It was widely successful, and it was all because we spent a lot of time with users up front, and then we actually went through and iteratively designed them and did do user testing. Actually, well, we created that.
That's so interesting. Can you tell us what it was like when you brought back that data and you said, actually, guys, we've found out something different. What was the reaction from the senior leadership?
Right. So it's not so much like a grand unveiling. We don't
Mhm.
necessarily say, okay, we're going to do all this work and then we come back. So working in an agile way, you're almost having daily stand-ups.
Right.
And so basically it's like we're informing them throughout the process that we're doing this. So it's like we say, this we learned
Mm,
a very interesting insight yesterday. This is what they say, oh, that's very interesting. Okay, oh, today we learned a very similar one. And so it's
mm,
like every day, all of a sudden it's cumulative. So it wasn't necessarily like like I said, like a big unveiling. We say, oh, this is what's gonna, this is what customers want. See,
mm.
I told you so. It was more
Yeah.
about this is validating our hypothesis. What do
Right.
you think about it? And then they co-created the in solution with that in mind, and then working together.
I think that's so important. That the point of iterative communication. Often, particularly in Japan, you do have the big reveal moment. It's that big, huge
Mm-hmm.
shacho comes, and everyone has you have the tea on the table, and then you do the whole and then maybe after you go for dinner or whatever. Sometimes you do have those moments, but actually, there's huge risk in those moments because if you haven't informed the customer of
Mm-hmm.
what's going on, it's really like it's American Idol. Really, at the end of the day, maybe they
Yeah,
like you, maybe
right.
it's yes, maybe it's not. You don't know, but in by including the customer in the research process, in their own research process, then you kind of recognize that we almost move from that analogy again to more of that to that co-creator. And when you are a co-creator, you're much more of that. You're a partner rather than a vendor or just some other person that's trying to sell us something, right? And that
Yep,
comes with trust, doesn't it?
exactly. So yeah, if unfortunately, if I had like, you know, yen, if I had 1,000 yen for every time I heard a story of a company that invested $1 million on some app, and then they basically put it in the market and no one uses it, and then they come to us or they come to someone and they say, "Can you help us market this app that we built that no one wants to use?" And so we're all of a sudden we have to force fit it in the market with
Right.
demand. I mean, we won't take those type of
Mm,
I wouldn't accept a project that actually says, okay, you built a really bad product and now you want to go force fit that into people's hands and tell them that they need to use it. It's not intuitive. It's not actually gives them value. So that will never happen if companies use an agile way of working. And unfortunately, Japan is still stuck in, and oftentimes, uh, a very waterfall methodology, which is what they learn in school.
mhm,
And it's a very engineering type mindset that let's plan everything out, and then all of a sudden we'll build it at the very end. But
mhm,
during that 1 year of that project, based customer expectations and everything has just flown past them. And
mm,
so basically the market has changed so much, but they're stuck in the mud saying we're not going to change it. We're going to stay the path on this one product that we've invested in. And then, but whereas agile, you're working, and then all of a sudden someone says something different, and then you say, okay, we need to take a different path. We need to do
mm,
this, and that's why agile is so critical to
mm,
actually really saving money. And
mm.
that's goes to the business, the ROI of agile and design thinking.
Absolutely. And including the customer in these insights or coming back to them kind of in an agile approach or in shorter intervals to explain or to share
Mm-hmm.
with them the insights is incredibly valuable as well because they're often the expert in their problem. So when you say, hey, we found out this insight, maybe you don't know kind of what's been going on the last 10 years, but they can say, oh, actually, that might be because we did this and this thing 3 years ago, and that's maybe where this particular insight came from. So including your customers
Mm-hmm.
in sharing the insights might even help you deep more or understand the problem more deeply because they're experts in their problems. You're helping them solve it,
Yeah.
but they're experts in where it
Mm,
hurts, right?
right. I often talk to customer experience professionals, and sometimes when I help them, I say when they need to do a presentation to their board or to their senior leadership, what's the most compelling way that they can get the leadership to listen to what they have to say, or say that think that it's important. And
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes it's very simply start with a quote from a customer. So
Yes.
on your presentation, instead of saying, okay, this is our idea, we want to build this new product and service, it's like, hey, this is what our customers are saying.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a customer here who's a high value customer to us. Let's say I'm in B2B business, and our one of our priority clients is saying, you're really hard to work with and your invoicing process is terrible. Then all of a sudden, so I got an idea, that's how we're going to solve this invoicing problem. Then all of a sudden, senior leaders are going to lean in and they're going to say, oh, okay, I didn't know the customers were saying this. Yeah, what's the idea? What we need to do different, right?
Right. Because even if senior leadership won't listen to their management, they'll at least listen to their customers, right? Off, because at the end of the day, that's
Well,
the
they
ones who.
should. Yeah, they should, right?
um, if we think
Right.
about, even kind of coming back to your original point, which was that you're here in Japan with kind of, your trunk of experience, of global experience about kind of how
Mm-hmm.
to help the market. Talk to us kind of as we kind of look to the future. Tell us a little bit about what are the consequences if we don't do this, if we don't begin small, if we don't start small, and we don't embrace research and design for the sake of a better customer experience, and then maybe moving towards that ideal kind of more ideal state. What do you have in mind?
Mm-hmm. I'm a little bit worried that this gap between what the services and products that Japanese companies make and the ideal future state or the ideal user experience that the customers want will continue to that gap will continue to broaden or get bigger. And I think if you look at it, I mean, you have, let's say, like you have all these mobile phones here in Japan. All this, all these they created these mobile phones, and then once Apple actually came in here with iPhones, and all the Japanese were buying iPhones
Mm,
because it was much easier to use, it was much more intuitive, it offered much more value to their lives than what the domestic products were doing. And I feel like that's a really good example of how the Japanese products are becoming less competitive on a global scale, and that gap between what customers expect from a website or a digital experience and what they can get from a Japanese company is getting wider. And so
mhm,
I think the future is if companies don't accelerate their digital transformation and really put investment dollars and smart people, consultants, or otherwise on these type of projects to help them become digital, competitive in a growing digital and connected world. I think that unfortunately Japan is going to be continually to find itself in a very uncompetitive position.
mhm. And if we look to, is there any maybe spaces or even brands in Japan that have been doing research well, or have been, or for example, if we look at maybe a domestic example that you can kind of point to them. And the reason why I'm asking this is as you started kind of talking about that, Japanese, and because I went to school in Japan, so I remember the time when I went to school twice in Japan. The first time we were all using the, clap phones, right? And how, and the idea was
Wow.
have as many possible straps on the phone as you possibly could, right? Do you remember? And you used to
Mhm.
like be on the train and somebody
Yeah,
used to have like a teddy bear, hanging off the phone and
I
stuff.
think that dates you, Brittany. I think that
I
dates
know
you,
that's, yeah, no,
Brittany.
but it's just between you and I and the internet. So, and
Okay.
then there's that, and then I remember the second time when I went to school, then we started seeing iPhones, and one thing that kind of you kind of recognize, it even happened with the MP3 player as well. I remember when I was in
Hmm.
high school, everyone was listening to MP3s, and then kind of we when I went to university, we were listening to iPods, and I remember thinking, I wonder, or now I'm kind of like reflecting, I wonder if there was kind of like an excuse that the domestic customer didn't have an opportunity to buy as easily overseas, didn't have an opportunity to inform themselves as easily of competitive
Hmm.
products. And they kind of, whatever was domestically available, you just kind of like have to kind of go with it. That's why I'm thinking, I wonder what
Hmm.
if, for example, some brands that do maybe research well.
I think. it's difficult to say, I guess. I mean, I think like a lot of foreign companies that are coming to Japan market now
Mm,
are more and more doing the appropriate research that they need to do well in the Japanese market. And an example that comes to mind would be Netflix, for example. Netflix.
right.
So Netflix is available in Japan. They've got a lot of really good content on there that actually Japanese viewers, they understand from doing research that actually comes that in, obviously they accumulate a lot of data on their platform to understand what are the type of content that Japanese viewers that appeal to Japanese viewers. I think like those are the type of examples that
Mm,
might be useful for Japanese companies to look at as well, because it's a really good use of data analytics to
mm,
help achieve good customer outcomes.
mhm,
And so probably, I hate to say this, but I think a lot of multinational companies that are here,
mhm,
they have operations in Japan, but maybe they might be run by Japanese, or maybe they might
mhm,
actually it might be a Japanese, uh, it might be a Japanese entity, but might be a subsidiary or just have a licensing agreement with a foreign multinational. I think those are the companies that, in my opinion, tend to leverage global best practices best to
mhm.
engage with the Japanese market.
Yeah, I think that that's a really great example, and interesting as well because you start seeing that Netflix had to then has also changed quite a lot since its first inception in Japan in terms of like what things are available and what not, and then now you even see what I think is really exciting that you see some even Japanese TV shows available for people abroad, so it's another opportunity to kind of share culture
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. If we kind of look to the
Sure.
future, what are you most excited about? What are the CX trends that you're most or the hottest trends that you're following? The ones that you're really like, I want to know where this goes in 12 to 18 months.
Um, Obviously, a lot of that is around emerging tech. So how are we
Hmm.
using emerging technology now to improve experiences? How are we using emerging tech to improve hybrid experiences? So hybrid means
Yeah.
we both have part physical experience and then part digital experience. Obviously, watching around how data and analytics are used then. So how can we capture the right insights from customer behavior, use that to inform our designs. Um, I think those are really areas that I think for the last couple of years has been globally, it's been an area of interest, but I'm starting to see that trickle into Japan. And I think that there's a little bit becoming more of an openness or some sense of progress with the clients that we work with and some of the other progressive companies in Japan is that, yeah, let's think about what inspiration from China or the US or from other more advanced markets can we leverage to actually improve
Mm.
our experiences here, leveraging emerging tech and data analytics.
That'll be really exciting, especially the hybrid experiences. That's because that'll be like that's really our next world. We've done the kind of pure digital, but I think we're finally coming out of it and somehow we'll be moving a hybrid. As we kind of wrap up, if we think about Japan,
Mm-hmm.
a very low risk culture, they don't like taking risks, and very high context, which is we don't tell you how we feel. What better place to start leveraging user research, right? What better
Yes.
place to start leveraging research?
So let's leverage research. Let's actually elevate the importance of designers. Let's actually put designers early into projects earlier. Let's
Mm.
actually empower them to make more decisions about the product and the service design before it goes to marketing. I think those are the paths forward to progress Japan and put them on the path to international competitiveness.
Ryan, we're so lucky that you offered to come back. I think this was such a really meaningful episode, and I certainly learned a lot. Thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully it won't be too long to come back again.
Okay, thank you so much. Good to see you, Brittany. I really appreciate it. All the best.